Remember this? You probably remember this as the moment Luke Skywalker appeared at the end of The Mandalorian Season 2. It was one of the best moments in modern TV, but what if I told you it was also the single biggest moment that led to its downfall, and the slop cameo hybrid crap we get today? You see, after a troubling period in Disney Star Wars, The Mandalorian was a shining gem, standing out with its more down-to-earth and grounded story focusing on a found family. Now at the time, fans loved the inclusion of the character after Disney had been, let's say, controversial with him in The Last Jedi, but what no one could have foreseen was the butterfly effect and what I like to call the cameification of all modern pop culture franchises. But how do we get here? Well, let's start off by defining what a cameo actually is. Classically, a cameo is basically when a famous character or actor shows up unexpectedly for a short period of time. They've always existed and have been funny winks and nods to the audiences, like Stan Lee used to do in the Marvel films. But crucially, they're not really involved with the plot. They exist as a quick little wink and that's it. So that actually does beg the question on if Luke was even a cameo at all. He had definite plot impact, after all. But what I'd argue is that Luke showing up almost redefined what a cameo could even be. Because now anytime a character or actor shows up without warning for a few minutes, it's considered a cameo, which is why it became so lazy. But anyway, let's look at why this one worked, then compare it to the slop that tried to imitate it to see why it never worked again. Part 1. Why it worked. Essentially, Luke Skywalker is an iconic character who Disney had screwed over in The Last Jedi. And I mean really screwed. People are still mad about that and don't think Luke would ever act like that, including Mark Hamill himself. But it also genuinely wrapped up the show to that point. Like, Grogu needed to go home, and one of the only active Jedi around was Luke Skywalker. So there was already speculation he was going to show up. But I think the real masterstroke of why this did work, and why people lost their shit when it happened, was because it was a surprise. No one knew what was happening. Disney did a good job of keeping it a secret, and it actually felt like a worthy cameo for the fans. A nod and a wink to say, hey, we know we screwed up with The Last Jedi. Here's the real Luke, and the numbers speak for themselves. The episode is still highly rated, and many people, including me, see this as the peak of not only The Mandalorian, but of Star Wars itself, with the sole exception of Andor, of course. Part 2. The wrong lesson. Now, as you can imagine, after this happened, every executive in Hollywood immediately sat down and asked, why did people like that? And unfortunately, I think they came to the completely wrong conclusion. Because if you ask me why it worked, I'd tell you it worked because it was earned, it made sense, it was set up, and they incorporated it into the story. And most importantly, nobody knew it was coming. If you ask a modern studio why it worked, I think they'd tell you people like it when famous character appears. And those are two very different lessons. You know, like, one requires good writing and the other requires a phone call. By the way, almost immediately after this, like every other franchise became obsessed with cameos. Not the stories, no, not the characters, don't be silly now, but the cameos. And the fans didn't exactly help. You see in early 2021, WandaVision's airing, and Elizabeth Olsen does an interview where she says there's going to be a Luke Skywalker-style cameo. Well, that destroyed the internet, didn't it? Because now, every week, people were convinced Mephisto is showing up, or Doctor Strange, or Reed Richards, or Professor X. At one point, I think people would have literally accepted anybody. And the funny thing is, she wasn't even lying. The cameo was Evan Peters, the other Quicksilver from the X-Men films. And honestly, that's a freaking great cameo. So the problem wasn't even the cameo. The problem was that everyone had spent 6 weeks convincing themselves that the second coming of Christ was about to walk through Wanda's front door. And from then on, all hell broke loose, because people stopped watching the shows to see what happened next. They started watching the shows to see who would show up next. And that's where the poisoning of modern fandom come in. Because now every episode wasn't just judged on whether it was good, it was judged on whether it delivered the thing Twitter had invented in its head. And unfortunately for us, Marvel looked at this and thought, brilliant, let's do more of that. Which is how we ended up with entire films whose main selling point wasn't even the plot. It was spotting people you recognize. Doctor Strange 2, Spider-Man No Way Home, and Deadpool and Wolverine. Part 3. How it cancelled Doctor Who. Right, so let's talk about Doctor Who. With the news that the show has basically been cancelled, I believe one of the reasons is what we're talking about here. So Russell comes back in 2023, and I thought it was going to be good, except Russell had become obsessed with generating content. And he's not even subtle about it either. He's done interviews where he's talked about wanting Doctor Who to be more like the MCU.
It's very much kind of internet age storytelling where...
And was that deliberate?
Yes, you just hope it'll generate content.
Spin-offs, interconnected stories, audience talking online and making theories. And the only problem with that is, the MCU isn't something you want to copy anymore. At that point, it was actively falling apart. At the end of the day, the MCU was popular because of its stories, not its setup and AI slop. And somewhere along the line, people like Russell forgot that. So instead of focusing on making the best Doctor Who episode possible, it felt like the show became obsessed with giving out things to talk about. So you got Mrs. Flood, you got Susan Twist, you got The One Who Waits, you got Ruby's mum. Every episode felt like it was planting the seeds for Twitter rather than telling a story. And Doctor Who isn't the only franchise to die like this. I mean, we've already spoken about the MCU, obviously Doctor Who, then we've got the DCU, which was already dying, but Flash killed that dead. And ironically, the thing that kicked this off, Luke Skywalker, has even killed Star Wars. So what's the solution then? Well, I think we all know the answer, but let's apply it to something. The Penguin. A show absolutely no one asked for, but totally earned the right to do the thing every modern franchise is desperate to do. Bring in a Batman cameo. I mean, think about it. You've watched The Penguin, it's brilliant, and by the final episode, Batman showing up would make complete sense. The city's falling apart, and everything is escalating. The story naturally points in that direction, and that's exactly why it's so impressive they don't do it. Because the show is confident enough to stand on its own. It doesn't need Batman. It doesn't need a surprise cameo. It doesn't need a post-credit scene teasing 12 other shows. It's just good. And ironically, that's the exact lesson everyone should have learned from Luke Skywalker. Luke wasn't the reason The Mandalorian worked. The Mandalorian worked because The Mandalorian was already good. Luke was just the reward. But modern TV looked at that moment and somehow came to the conclusion that the reward was the entire point. And ever since then, we've had franchises desperately chasing the next Luke Skywalker moment without understanding why the first one worked. And honestly, I think that's why modern TV feels empty. Everybody wants the payoff, nobody wants to do the setup. Thank you for watching.